I bet you haven't heard that in a very, very long time. I just want to say hey, welcome and thank you. This is as the camel says in the commercial. Guess what day it is? It's Inauguration Day, and in just under 2 hours, Barack Insane Obama leaves Washington for Palm Springs as a private citizen, and Donald J. Trump becomes the 45th president of the United States. That's on the way, and of course, starting at 9:30 this morning, we'll be switching to live coverage from Fox News of all of the events and the festivities. So you'll be able to hear the swearing-in ceremony here just after 10 o'clock, as well as Mr. Trump's his inaugural address, and then followed by some of the events that will follow until 11 o'clock, and then we'll rejoin the Rush Limbaugh show at 11 o'clock this morning. Rush will be covering pretty much the same event, so you're not missing a lot of his commentary. We're just giving it to you directly this morning from Washington. Bill Colley with you, as the big voice guy said a few minutes ago on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I thank you very, very much for joining us today. And a couple of things I just wanted to mention off the top of the show. The hand-wringing of American liberals continues over Mr. Trump's arrival in Washington. And did you see some of the video from last night? They were setting fires and screaming that they're going to take over the country. Yeah. Pete Hegseth from Fox News, who could handle any one of these guys, having been an Iraqi war vet, was out in the crowd last night interviewing some of these kooks. And he would ask them a question. And some guy said, well, the guy had a old Soviet-style hat on. And he said, why are you wearing that? And the guy praised Joseph Stalin as a leader versus Donald Trump. So Hegseth says, did you know that Stalin killed 50 million people? And the guy says, well, but during the course of the Soviet Union and Stalin's reign, the population of the country increased by 1.6 million. Yeah, but 50 million got killed. It doesn't matter to these people. I mean, they're not there out of any notions of our republic or even democracy. We are a republic and not necessarily democracy, although we have some democratic tendencies. But these people are there because they're anarchists or they are communists. That's why they're in the streets of Washington. And it's like someone has taken their teething ring away, and now they're angry. We've got 27 at the moment. I'm going to call it 27. It's very slippery out there in spots. Trust me, I had to switch vehicles this morning when I left the house. The Jeep was parked a bit of a distance, and to walk across the sheet of ice, I did not have my ice skates with me. And so the Chevy was parked, the Malibu was right by the edge, so I jumped in the Malibu and I drove that instead this morning. But you're going to find if you're out driving or you're trying to walk anywhere today, at least until we warm up a little bit, it is highly unpleasant at the moment. Here's a couple of notes about what liberals are doing in their mindset and why they're so out of touch and why they can't win some elections any longer. They're not winning them, obviously, at the state levels. They're not winning them in congressional districts, and they didn't win the White House. This country is $20 trillion in debt, and I saw this story just before bed last night. It was one of the late-breaking stories at WashingtonExaminer.com. With midnight regulation, Obama Energy Department just outlawed your three-way bulb. Again, a country $20 trillion in debt. A trillion is 1,000 billion, and of course a billion is 1,000 million. We are $20 trillion in debt, and this is the last priority of the Obama White House. Three-way bulbs, the writer says, which have two different filaments and thus three different brightnesses, are currently exempted from the old rules barring incandescent light bulbs. The Department of Energy has just ruled that they now need to be covered. The department's reasoning, DOE expects these sales will likely increase since these lamps could be used as replacements for other regulated lamp types. In other words, people might start buying these bulbs because they want regular light bulbs rather than expensive LEDs or, the writer says, crappy fluorescents. So, yeah, this is the argument from the left is we need more of these regulations on what light bulbs you buy. And again, they wonder why they can't win elections. Last night there was a rally in New York City, and some of the country's leading leftists, celebrity leftists, decided to try to fire up the crowd. This is actor Alec Baldwin, and he's vowing revolution.
These people are a disgrace. They are a disgrace to everything you and I believe in. But there is hope, and the hope is us and us fighting. 100 days of resistance.
What do you do after the first 100 days? Oh, they all go back to sipping Cabernet. That's right. And you and whose army is going to lead this revolution? That's the next question for them. Now, he wasn't alone. They had to trot out a lot of the other half-dead liberals from the celebrity culture to speak to this crowd, including Michael Moore.
Here is the good news. The good news is there's more of us than there are of them.
In other words, there are a lot of obese Americans out there, and many the size of beluga whales, just like him. And where do they get this notion that there's more of them than there are of the rest of us? And how do they know so many people who in the past voted for Democrats voted for Donald Trump this year? I have been reading a 4-part series at Real Clear Politics, and the latest one today shows that across rural America, where most working people still live, it becomes redder and redder and redder every election cycle. And Mr. Trump just swept those counties like no other Republican in decades. In decades. Hillary Clinton won what are called the mega cities. You know, that the largest cities in the country. But those only impact a handful of states, which were already blue. And they're showing on these electoral maps, and this is the other difficulty. It used to be in the old days that gerrymandering still protected a lot of old Democrats' congressional districts. But in many of these states, especially in the upper Midwest, most of those counties have now turned red from blue, so you can't even gerrymander them in favor of Democrats. It's getting more and more difficult to find a Democrat in small-town America. I was talking to someone the other day that I work with, and she was explaining that her parents were both involved with the Democrat Party in the 1950s and 1960s, and that they were very prominent here in Idaho. And she was referencing Frank Church, and she was referencing Cecil Andrus, and how at one time, Democrats had a fair shake of getting elected to office statewide here. Well, what has changed about this? And it strikes me that the Democrat Party, and I don't really want to give them any advice, but I don't think Frank Church ever campaigned up and down the state saying, if you elect me, we'll have same-sex marriage, and we'll make sure that you can kill your baby, no matter how old your baby is, and whatever you need for your convenience. It never entered the minds of those Democrats to actually try to promote those alternatives and traditional people in this country. And I'll say this, I don't believe most people give a hoot who you have a private relationship with. But on the other hand, it's not their priority to have that debate. And that became all that the Democrat Party was about. And they kept saying, oh, we're winning the culture wars. Well, they were, but they were ignoring the fact. Mike Barnacle, the liberal plagiarist newspaper columnist, who's one of the regulars on Morning Joe on MSDNC, said this morning, it's dawning on them what's happened here, but he said, the problems of the what they call the Great Recession only lasted a couple of months. The most serious problems, but tens of millions of Americans lost just about everything they had, and they never recovered it. And nobody, over the course of the last 8 years, nobody tried to help them get it back. Instead, both parties for many, many years focused only on the elites, and then Donald Trump came along and said, whoa, wait a minute here. There's this vast swath of people out here. And I keep hearing that it was not a Great Depression in the way that we had in the 1930s because of the genius of Barack Obama. But the truth is, it wasn't a Great Depression because we had cheap energy, because of things like fracking. And fracking allowed us to draw cheap oil and natural gas out of the ground, which kept energy prices low, which kept Americans, at least to some degree, working and kept the economy to some degree humming. However, it was Mr. Obama and his White House, the people who don't want you buying a 3-way light bulb, who are opposed to fracking. They couldn't stop it in every case, but they were opposed to it. If we'd been able to build the Keystone Pipeline, the economy would be even better. They have been a hindrance to working people across America. I'll call it 8:17. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I've got this from a conservative writer at the New York Post, which is probably the most conservative of the newspapers in that city, that den of iniquity that it's called New York City. His name is Seth Lipsky, but he's quoting Robert Bartley, the current editor of the Wall Street Journal. As Bartley comprehended that the Democrats' fury went beyond politics their fury at losing the election, and must have deeper subconscious roots. His theory was that they were unable to deal with the sense they were losing their birthright. What he meant was that, as he put it, quote, base Democrats think of themselves as the best people, the most intelligent and informed, the most public spirited, the most morally pure, unquote. If that's what's at stake, no wonder they're so devastated. I remember telling some liberals one time, there is a research was done by a liberal college professor, and I interviewed him on a radio show, as he discovered that liberals give, they're tightwads, they give very little money to charity. Conservatives give scads of money to charity. And it angered the liberals, and they said, well, where do you get your information? So I gave them the link to his site, and they still refused to believe it. Hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil. They just cover their eyes, cover their ears, and pretend that it's not there, even though it's the plain truth and data backs it up. We have a caller with us. Caller, we're at 8:18. We've got about a minute and a half before the break. Go ahead.
Well, I just say thank God for the way the world works now. We can hear what Democrats say, no matter where they are and what they're doing. There's a gentleman named Larry Anderson who recounted one time on this show, but it was many years ago, about listening to Frank Church at a campaign event in northern Idaho, and how his rhetoric there was completely different than his rhetoric when he did his campaigning in southern Idaho. And so it's nice. They're out of the closet, so to speak, and they can't hide anymore behind their lies. So they have to come out and say they're for all this stuff, and that's when the average ordinary person just turns on a dime and goes, people are crazy.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I thank you. It reminds me of the old Pat Paulson routine when he was running for president. As a joke, he got a couple of million votes, but as a joke in 1968, and he would go to California, and he'd get off the airplane and speak to the press and say, well, I want to tell you how glad I am to be in California. You know, it's the greatest state in the union, and nothing else compares to it. And then he'd fly off to Texas. He'd get off the airplane in Dallas and say, I just want to tell you how great it is to be in the great state of Texas, the greatest state in the union. You know, I was just in California, and that's a terrible place. And in the internet age, the Democrats, as the caller said, in the internet age, the Democrats have nowhere to hide, because what you say in Coeur d'Alene is somebody's tweeting it out in real time, and it's being read all over the place. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. We're at 26. We've got more coming up in just a moment on this subject. Lots of activity already underway. Dick Cheney's actually showing up with his cowboy hat, his Stetson for the, he wore almost like a bowler hat back in 2008. All of the big names rolling into Washington for the big event. Details coming up. Story also, I mentioned Washington Examiner earlier. Story says a poll has been done by an independent polling group, and up to 28% of federal bureaucrats say they may quit their jobs because of Donald Trump's arrival in Washington. There's the door. Don't let it hit you. Well, you know. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com, 25. We're at 8:23. I stepped on some scales yesterday for the first time in several weeks. I am down 60 pounds since the end of September. Now, I have to tell you that includes a little bit of, generous portions at Christmas time. And I'm still down 60 pounds. Why am I down 60 pounds? Because I'm a participant in the Total Body Transformation System, which is not a fad diet. It is a scientifically backed up and proven way to lose weight, and to lose weight in a healthy manner. Developed by a company that's been in business over 2 decades. It has an A+ rating from the Better Business Bureau. Now, I've lost 60 pounds, and I haven't made exercise a huge part of my life. And I'm still eating a lot of the foods I like. So think about that for a moment. I have a friend, as I mentioned, she lost 9 pounds in the first week on the diet. 9 pounds. She's a registered nurse, so she's doing this, and she knows a little bit about what's healthy and what's not. I wanted to tell you that there's a scientific evidence that's associated with the Total Body Transformation System, that it burns 6 times more fat, and you lose 8 times more weight than normal results from diet and exercise alone. It's a meal replacement plan, and often healthier than the meals you were already eating, and you can still have that healthy amount of calories. The average person who's on the diet drops 22 pounds and loses 4 inches off their waist in just 60 days. And I wanted to point out, too, as well, it's all natural when it comes to ingredients, scientifically validated ingredients that result in appetite control, increased metabolic fat burning, and a healthy natural boost of energy. It's also very affordable. I've compared it to what I would be spending on, a breakfast and lunch every day. It's about the same. So I don't have to worry about digging deep into my wallet every month to come up with a way about this. And I'm just telling you, it would work for you in the very same way. It's backed up with an unconditional money back guarantee. You can contact, if you'd like to know more, Don Chandler here in Twin Falls. Don lost 50 pounds on the diet. Actually, he's down even more now. He was mentioning that to me yesterday. His telephone number, 208-731-3560. Once more, you can reach Don Chandler, the marketing executive here in Twin Falls, at 731-3560. And Don will set you up, and you can join Don and I in being healthier men. I'm not going to say lesser men, although from a circumference-wise, yes, but healthier men. And it works for women, too. As I mentioned, my friend the RN is losing weight and just stunned by how quickly it's happening. 826, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Mr. Pence, who will be our next vice president, speaking last night at an event in Washington, choked up when he talked about leaving his home state of Indiana.
You know, the truth is, this is a bittersweet moment for us. For the past 4 years, we've had the incredible privilege to serve the people of Indiana as governor. And for all that is before us, I have to tell you, words cannot describe the honor and the gratitude we feel for having the chance to lead the state that we love.
I'm going to tell you right now, I hope that when Mr. Trump is finished, he just hands the baton off to Mike Pence. You've got a moment here, I think a couple of minutes before we go to the break again. We've got a caller on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Caller, you're on Top Story. Go ahead.
Well, good for you for losing that weight. I'm sure that makes you feel better. But, ABC this morning, first thing they're talking about, Trump's got to figure out a way to reach across the aisle. I mean, he don't have to reach across any aisle, and that's the whole deal to try to get him to compromise and so forth. And that's exactly the problem we've had with the Republicans in the past when they've had a majority and so forth. I just attended the annual potato conference down in Pocatello. A friend showed me an interesting photo of a friend that flew over the pyramids of Giza in Egypt on the 19th of December. The pyramids are covered with snow. They hadn't had snow in Egypt there for over 100 years. Over 100 years. I wanted to pass that along because it was pretty, all of us that know that the global warming thing's a hoax. I mean, folks, we're being, it's just the lies go on. You won't see that on any kind of media coverage.
No.
So forth. But anyway, if the Republicans will just sit back and vote for Trump's agenda, the wall, stop the Muslim immigration from these key areas and so forth, and get the trade agreements so that they favor the United States, or at least they're equal, and do the trade thing separate from all the rest of the nonsense like this Trans-Pacific Partnership, which only has 5 out of 29 segments that are chapters that actually have to do with trade. The other 24 have to do with political and economic merger. But anyway, I wanted to pass out a deal about the pyramids covered with snow. That must be something.
Thank you. Thank you much for the call. And just quickly on that note, there's a piece today at Wall Street Journal that says that last year they're saying was the hottest on record. Well, as it turns out, it's actually the room. It's within that margin. It's like 0.4 or 0.04. That's a 0.04 tenths of Celsius hotter, which is well within the statistical margin for error. So it could have been colder, which means that the 18-year pause continues. And last year was even an El Nino year. Number two, the New York Times reported that story, but didn't give any of the facts and figures because they didn't want people to sit there and go, well, gee, could mean it was colder. Two, I got to tell you that there's just so much going on today. But Sean Spicer, who'll be the new communications director of the White House, says TPP is dead on arrival, and some of the first actions the president may take will be the new president, to dismantle the North American Free Trade Agreement. Oh, and they're also going to open up all sorts of venues for energy, which means cheaper energy, which means roaring economy. More on the inauguration on the way in just a couple of minutes. Wow, talk about eating crow. I just noticed Debbie Wasserman Schultz showing up for the inauguration. Not all Democrats are sitting it out. Who cares if they do? It's not a big deal. As Trump said, I've got seats. I've got people demanding seats. I'll just provide those to the people who've come to me and said they need a space. Bill Colley with you on Top Story this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. By the way, when Obama was elected president, I remember just referring to him as Obama on the air one day, and some fellow called me up, some Ebonics speaker, and said that I was being racist and disrespectful by not calling him President Obama whenever I addressed him. Well, I've seen a lot of these black activists on TV, and they just say Trump, so maybe they're racist too. Well, I guess that's obvious. Thank you for joining us today, and I do want to mention the gun gang is coming up just after 9 o'clock this morning, but we have an abbreviated show today. At 9:30, we are going to join Fox News for live coverage half an hour before the new president-elect takes the oath of office. So those things are coming up in the next hour of the show. I also wanted to mention my friends at Waddell & Reed right here in Twin Falls. They've been in business now since 1937. You do the math, 80 years. One of the oldest firms to offer mutual funds. They own and manage 2 mutual fund families and invest by a conservative nature. These are people who know what they're doing. Well, 80 years in business, that's obvious. They take a planning approach, and they'll work with you and look at each puzzle of whatever you're trying to put together. And they help build proper expectations. They build plans around clients' needs and goals at Waddell & Reed and help manage money. And they take planning personally at Waddell & Reed, right here in Twin Falls. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I was telling you how Mike Pence choked up while he was speaking last night and how he's going to miss his home state of Indiana. Well, on the other side of the coin, the new president-elect seems to be enjoying himself immensely.
I will say the other side is going absolutely crazy. They're going crazy. We have an election coming up in 2 years. We're going to get a lot of senators and a lot of congressmen elected. A lot.
That is, if they follow what Charles Hurt, who was a long time and one of the early backers of Trump when Trump got into this campaign, he writes for the Washington Times. When a lot of conservative writers wanted nothing to do with Mr. Trump, Hurt was saying, guys, look out. And this guy has something to say that's important for voters. Hurt says today, if Republicans in the House and Senate don't follow along, they're going to pay. In other words, there will be primaries, and Mr. Trump, he's obviously not shy about getting behind a cause, could end up changing the playing field even more dramatically in his favor. We've got to mention too as well. The last person who probably did this was Ronald Reagan, and Hurt says that the change represented by this election might be a lot like 1980, but maybe even more so like 1932. Bernie Sanders showing up for the inauguration right now, dressed like he's going bird watching. Well, socialists don't like jackets and ties. He never owned any until he actually got elected to Congress. We should point that out. And probably he had to go down to the local Goodwill store to pick something out. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story. It's 8:37. Telephone number to reach our program, 736-0300. That's 736-0300, and we're at 26 this morning. If I could quickly, I wanted to share with you a line from John Voight. John Voight was speaking at the Lincoln Memorial during the events there last night. Voight is a former Hollywood liberal who had an epiphany some years ago, ended up getting involved with the Tea Party movement, and has ever since been on board.
We have all been witness to a very grueling year and a half for the president-elect. We have been witness to a barrage of propaganda that left us all breathless with anticipation, not knowing if God could reverse all the negative lies against Mr. Trump, whose only desire was to make America great again. He certainly didn't need this job. And yes, God answered all our prayers. Because here it is. We will be part of history, all of us. And President Lincoln, who sits here with us, I'm sure is smiling, knowing America will be saved by an honest and good man who will work for all the people, no matter their creed or color.
He referenced God a couple of times there. If there were any liberals in the crowd, they likely shriveled up like a garden slug coming in contact with salt. We're at 8:39, it's 26, and just a quick reminder, some cold weather returning again next week, single-digit overnight lows. Again, it takes a huge toll on your heating unit at home. If you've got problems with your furnace, you need to call Ramsey Heating and Electric in Burley. The pros at Ramsey Heating and Electric will come out and get the job done right. They'll do the repairs and they'll get it done right the first time. Problem-free cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. Telephone number 678-0459. Ramsey Heating and Electric. They sell warm winters and cool summers. Telephone number again, 678-0459. More on this subject. Big day in America today. That's coming up in just a few minutes. I got to share Charlie Howell, of course, who's commissioner on the county commission over in Jerome County. Mentioned something about my weight loss, and he says, he adds that we're losing more useless weight in Washington today. Well said. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Talking a little bit about weight loss, it's good for your health if you can do it. And we wanted to point out we do a health talk every week right here on the radio. It's called Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine. We're joined by the doctor or one of his associates from Tripp Family Medicine, and we talk about medical issues. We also take your telephone calls. Tripp Family Medicine is located on Fillmore Street right here in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office. And the office is also still looking for new patients. And often they can see you, often being the operative word. If you call in the morning and you need to get in and see the doctor for you've got a medical issue, they can generally see you on the same day. And we want to point out that the great slogan they have at the office, life's too short not to feel good. Bill Colley with you today. Remember this guy, Chris Matthews from MSDNC, who said something to the effect when Obama got inaugurated, and it might have been his campaign, one of his campaign speeches, said that he got to thrill up the leg, which is grammatically incorrect if you still have two. But he's never been able to live that down, and now I wonder if he's he was saying his farewell to Obama last night on television. And as I was listening to it, I thought to myself, is this what they were warning you about in the Bible when they talked about the onanism? Let's just take a listen to this for a moment.
Let me finish tonight with the American president we're about to lose. Barack Obama is, above all, a fine man. Just look at him. Is there a husband, a father that we would wish more as a model for our sons-in-law to have and raise our grandchildren? Is there anyone who carries himself better in word and sentiment and temperament and optimism? Hope. That was the word on that poster. It's the feeling he exemplified today in his last press briefing. He talked about being proud of raising patriotic daughters, about people being more good than bad, that at his core, he thinks we can be okay. That the only thing that's the end of the world, he said, is the end of the world. Well, this president said all this knowing full well who won this election, who's going to sit next to him in that car right up to Capitol Hill on Friday, who's going to take his place at noon. The only thing that's the end of the world, he said, is the end of the world. He spoke not just as a political leader, but as a man looking to the problems that still divide us. He said we need to imagine being that other person, growing up in the inner city without a job within 20 miles, being that guy stuck out in the country who, too, doesn't have the prospect of a job in some different 20 miles. He talked about imagining being in the other guy's skin, and that's when we'll make progress. But he's not leaving us before saying that we have made progress. He came to office when we were divided by an unpopular war, crushed by a great recession with unemployment heading to 10%. He's leaving us having cut that rate in half and tripled, by the way, the stock market. And by the way, a lesson hopefully learned of no more wars like Iraq. He came in with decades of unfulfilled promises for health care in this country from both parties and met that promise with a program that the incoming president has now made clear he needs to match or better. He came into a country where marriage equality was well over the horizon and brought the LGBT community into the sunlight of recognition, freedom, even because of his own fine goodwill, admiration. To say that no person can make a difference, I give you the fine case of that fine man, Barack Obama.
You know, first of all, he didn't end the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. We still have troops on the ground, and it looks like we may have to put more troops in order to try and stabilize things because he decided to cut and run so quickly. When it comes to the economy, as I mentioned earlier, he had nothing to do with the energy revolution in this country. In fact, tried to stop it, but that's what saved the economy. And to sit here and talk about providing health care for people, the numbers don't back that up. I mean, it's I just had a note from a friend the other day. He's working 2 jobs. At his Obama, because he doesn't have health care at either job, but he said that his Obamacare tab shot up to $1,119 per month. So he has decided he'll take a penalty and drop it. Now, if we dismantle it quickly in Washington, you may not have to worry about any of those penalties. I mentioned yesterday, I got a letter on Wednesday from the IRS because I skipped insurance for 2 months in 2015, the beginning of 2015, while I was waiting to get on the plan here at work. And they're telling me, if you don't have insurance this year, we're going to have to fine you $770. Well, I've had insurance for nearly 2 years. And again, and the jobless rate, go back to the jobless rate. There are 95 million in these people in this country, which is approaching a third of the country that is out of the workforce, adults. Jimmy Carter, by the way, just showing up for the inaugural event. There's a Democrat who is not going to be boycotting it. There's a handful of people who are still showing up. The thing is, if you create a lot of new jobs at minimum wage, I guess people do have work, and and some of them are willing to take anything because it's still a pride matter. But the big paying manufacturing jobs, we've continued to hemorrhage those. Pat Buchanan cited a fact that is just staggering. 55,000 manufacturing operations have left this country since the turn of the 21st century. Mr. Obama has done nothing to turn that around. 95 million people, adults, are out of the workforce. So they can fudge because they don't count those people any longer on the jobless rolls. And when people like Chris Matthews and other liberals in media go along and just keep ignoring that to try to convince you, then that is fake news. It's 8:49. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. The Obamas are hosting the Trumps right now for coffee or tea at the White House. And Mr. Trump, of course, does not use caffeine. He doesn't drink any alcohol. He doesn't use nicotine. So he'd probably have to have decaf. The doors are swinging open, so it looks as if, here they come. The families are beginning to, it's the vice presidential duo, Mr. Biden and Mr. Pence, already headed to their limousines. They'll be riding together. But the families are now emerging on their way to the Capitol building. As I say, we'll be carrying all of this live this morning, starting at 9:30 our time, and the swearing-in will take place just after 10 o'clock this morning, and you can hear all of it on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. If you can hear, that is, because I've been telling you for quite some time, if you've got issues with your hearing, we know someone who can remedy that. Dr. Christine Pickup, a doctor of audiology at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. She's offering a new hearing device, which is, it works with the brain to help those with hearing loss hear more naturally than any previous aid on the market. She's offering a 2-week free trial. You can call today to schedule your personal fitting appointment. Open your world to better hearing. Mount Harrison Audiology at 312-0957. That's 312-0957. Speaking of telephone numbers, our number here at the studio, 736-0300. That's 736-0300. I may have a caller, and it may have gone to the rollover line. Yeah, that's what I think happened. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air on KLIX at 8:50. We'll call it. Go ahead.
Yeah, Bill. You wait and wait for somebody to come along that says things that make logical sense, and when you believe that he actually is sincere about it, you feel moved. And yesterday, when Trump landed, the new sheriff flew into town. Like I've said in the past, I wept. I know it may sound corny, but I love my country that much, and I think that this man loves it just as much as me. And I think that since World War II, we've had nothing but the breakdown of our society in every way you can possibly imagine from these leftist animals. And today, I think the to before across their face is going to be when Donald Trump takes the oath of office, and they're standing there going, well, this guy really is president, and you know what? He comes in ahead of schedule and under budget. I think that liberalism, communism will be set back. I don't know how far, but it's a great day in America. Thanks, Bill.
Hey, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah.
Did you see the story that CNN actually did yesterday, where apparently they were saying that if Trump were killed before he actually took the oath of office, that it would be an Obama designee who would become the next president and not Mike Pence. But they explained in detail how the president-elect could be assassinated before taking the oath. In other words, giving people the idea on how they could go about doing that. Now, this to me is the height of irresponsible journalism. It's also sedition. It's also recommending and advocating violence. What do we have to do to straighten this media out in this country, other than perhaps just not paying any attention to them and putting them out of business?
I'll tell you what, I think when Trump ignores you and you become insignificant, like he told the reporter from CNN, you're fake news. I think that the world is sick and tired of, America is sick and tired of it, and their ratings are just going to drop. And, they may be looking at bankruptcy or whatever it is they end up doing straight in the eye. Of course, somebody will keep them propped up. But the truth of the matter is they are insignificant. You know what happens? You work your life, your phone rings all day long like mine, and I'm needed and I appreciate it. Sometimes you're stressed, but when you get older and you retire, you become insignificant, and nobody calls anymore, and nobody comes and sees you anymore, and all of a sudden you realize you don't matter. And that's what's going to happen to CNN, I think.
Well said, and I thank you much.
I hope. Thanks, Bill.
Great analogy. Yeah, a lot of these folks in media. Well, by the end of this calendar year, and it's got nothing to do with Trump, although he may hasten it. By the end of this calendar year, a lot of these big newspapers across the country will simply not be published in print any longer. They'll be downsized, and they'll be working as small internet operations. And the competition there is fierce. Glenn Beck said that the other day because his blaze is down below half of where it was at its peak. Beck may have also helped shoot his toes off as well with his Trump opposition, but Eric Erickson admits the same thing, that his new website, The Resurgence, is already going under. The New York Times has rented out most of the floors in its building. It's iconic. Well, they built a new building a few years ago in New York City. They've already decided to rent out several floors because, they're going to fire people. Why are they firing people? Because nobody's buying the paper any longer. I have this today. 4 recent examples show why no one trusts media coverage of Trump. From the great Molly Hemingway at The Federalist. The unsubstantiated New York Times hit on Rick Perry. The Times, without any sourcing, apparently, other than somebody who claimed to have worked on the Trump transition team, said Perry thought that his job as the new energy secretary would be to jet around the world promoting American energy, and then discovered that it was an entirely different role, nuclear regulations and the like. And the problem is, the guy that the Times cited in this story, Perry knows more about energy than probably anybody else in America. Even Bill Richardson, the former liberal governor of New Mexico, says that. Said it yesterday in the Washington Times. But they quoted this guy, and long before Perry was even considered for the role of energy secretary, this guy that the Times supposedly talked to had left the Trump transition team. So there you go. So you can't trust the New York Times. How about this? The Washington Post. They mocked the nominee for Secretary of Agriculture for praying. His name is Sonny Perdue, and of course he's from Georgia. And they mocked him because he once led a prayer for rain. And they're saying that they're trying to imply that as Secretary of Agriculture, this is how he's going to run the department. But Hemingway points out she's a Lutheran. She said, we pray for rain at church. She said, in fact, a lot of people in the Christian faith pray for rain, and in the Muslim faith, and in the Jewish faith, and in the Hindu faith. And she said, it just shows you that nobody there probably has ever been to a church or any other house of worship. And so they're making these judgments as if somehow, Christians are stupid because they're praying for rain. But they don't know any better. David Gerlenter, who's gotten on board with the Trump team, they said he was anti-intellectual. Well, he's considered a genius. He's a professor at Yale University. How could he be anti-intellectual? His only criticism was to say that too many liberal intellectuals don't have open minds. CNN's Jim Acosta badgering Martin Luther King III for an effort to try to swipe back at Donald Trump. Was trying to put words in his mouth. He was even, Acosta, this is the guy Trump told off the other day, Acosta was denounced this morning, even on Morning Joe, by the liberals on MSDNC. They're all aware of it, that there's so many, they're not even rogue elements anymore, but there are so many elements now operating here in this effort. They're so aware of it that even some of those who've already been, left-leaning for many, many years are starting to realize they dug their own grave. The motorcade is making its way from the White House, and it is headed to, the beautiful streets of Washington. Still love that city. It's my favorite baseball town. Well, Baltimore's pretty close, but I still love the trips I used to make there. They're motoring through the city now. Streets are lined. They're on their way, and as I say, our coverage will begin in live coverage from Fox News here at News Radio 1310 KLIX. And newsradio1310.com will begin at 9:30 this morning. But I will add this. We're going to talk about guns, at least for the next half hour. That's coming up following Fox News at 9 o'clock. Right here on Top Story with Bill Colley.